Hello and welcome to another fabulous day of drawing. Today this is the portrait that we're going to work on. So we have a nice frontward facing, easy to measure, very clear featured face here. And this face has great contrasts, some good even opportunities for learning some good blending skills. And I really just like how definite the features are. So I think that it's going to be a great one for those of you who haven't drawn a lot of faces in the past, and it's also going to be a great one for those of you who are ready for something a little bit more challenging, because there's enough here that you can do a lot with it. The shading is really interesting around the face, for instance, but it's not so complex like a face looking off into the distance or difficult to decipher that it's going to be difficult for beginners. So that's why I chose it, and here's what we're going to do. Start with your printed out reference material. I like to make mine as big as it will fit on a printed page, and then I measure it just to see the real length and width. If possible, I try to make those easier numbers. So for instance, this one started out as like 7.22, so I just brought that down to 7 inches square this way and 6.5 going the other way, and that meant that I had to cut up a little bit on her shoulders. That's okay. But then what you're going to do next is set up that mathematical proportion, and this part can be tricky, but don't let it be. It's not that big a deal. So here we go. I'm going to write down to find my missing side. First of all, that this is 7 by 6.5. Set that equal to the size that your drawing paper is going to be. So then you go over to your drawing paper, and I always measure the longest side first so that I know I won't run out of room. And I felt like a good size for that length would be 9 inches. So if 9 inches is my long side on my drawing paper, I set the long side of the drawing paper equal to the long side of the reference material, and then my unknown side is x. That's what I have to find. So you cross multiply 7x, set that equal to 9 times 6.5, which I'm getting my calculator to do. 58.5. And then you're going to divide both sides by 7. That's going to leave just the x alone, and we'll have 8.35. 8.36. So sometimes you get these difficult to work with numbers, but it's only for one side, so it's less difficult. So now I know that on my drawing paper sides need to be 9 by 8.36 in order for them to be exactly proportional to the reference material, and that's what I want, because I'm going to set out a graph. The graph around the outside of the paper is what is going to help me to lay out my drawing accurately and quickly and without a lot of mistakes and the need for a lot of erasing. You don't have to do it this way. I didn't used to do it this way either. I would start by just sketching this the size of the head or the shape of the head overall, and then place the features on it. But for learning how to draw, I really feel that the graph helps people who don't need to struggle with a whole lot of things all at the same time. So when you're still trying to learn how to hold your pencil and make different marks, I don't feel like it's really great to also be struggling with trying to draw basically freehand. So the graph is a nice happy medium between tracing and doing it completely blindly. So I measured, I got my drawing paper, I got the rectangle or the square on this as well, and this is not the same size as my reference material, but it's exactly proportional. That's why we set out the fraction. So then I made myself some nice even increments around the outside by measuring, and I did that on the length and width. And I have A through I, top and bottom, and 1 through 9, top and bottom on the side. Then, crucially, you need to have those exact same increments on your drawing paper. Then, once you have the graph all numbered and the numbers and letters correspond between reference material and drawing paper, you can start to lay it out using that graph to help you to plot your significant external points. So let me show you what I mean. I like to use a straight edge or a triangle to make sure that I'm finding things accurately as I start this. Obviously the top of the head goes off the page. So what I might start with is the side of the chin. I'm just going to line it up using the side of my graph, making sure that this stays even. And you can see that it's right at about 8 1/4. If I want to, I can extend that line out just so I can see quickly where the bottom of the chin would bisect the graph if that line were extended. I'm also going to find the sides of the face that same way. And I always go to the most external point, because obviously the face isn't perfectly square. But if I go scooching it over as far as I can before I actually touch the side of the face, I'm at this point, and that's a little bit after the C. Do the same thing for this side. And then don't forget, when you're transferring these points to your drawing, what the dots refer to. Ooh, G1/2, pretty evenly. So this is the outside of the face, not the outside of the ear. These points here and here are also going to be really easy to plot because they bisect the graph. So I'm going to go to my G1/2, that's about here, and I can either plot it with my pencil, or I can just plot it once again with that same straight edge. Line it up, and lightly I mark it down. I'm gonna go do the same thing here. This was at about C1/4, about here. So there's still a bit of guesswork involved, but the graph is going to get you much closer and much more definitive answer to where things should line up on the page than just eyeballing will, especially, like I said, if you're just beginning. And then just a little bit under the 8. About here for the bottom of the chin. So with just those partial lines in place, I can start to then sketch in the shape of the face. Sorry, it's hard to talk and draw sometimes, so I have these long gaps, but you can see what I'm doing. I'm looking to my reference material and I'm getting a sense of the shape of these features, and then I'm taking them to my drawing paper. So I'm trying to look for this curve and look for the point where the most external point was on my graph. It's right about here between the 4 and the 5. So that needs to be where this line becomes helpful. And then after that, it should dip down to the chin, and it's just going to be nice, gentle curve. And here too, the point that I drew should fall right at about the 5 mark, which means her face is pretty symmetrical. Then it dips in slightly, and at about the 3, I start to see the forehead or the hair begin, and about the 3 on this side too, and it's going to go up to about here, so I can sketch in that hairline. You just have to be sure that you're trusting your graph and you're being consistent with it. So don't do eyeballing and graph using when you're beginning your layout. Use it for everything. If you only use it part of the time, you're going to think that it doesn't work. Well, that's not the graph not working, that's you not using it right. So you really have to take your time. At about the 7, see the neck, and then right here that shoulder is going to go off the page. And here the neck is at about the D, and then it's going to go off the page at about that point. Then as I work, I'm going to use my kneaded eraser and clean up any excess graph lines, just to constantly be cleaning things up and getting rid of excess sketch lines. They might confuse the drawing a bit. Once you have the outside head in place, you can start to place the ears. So I can do that by extending the line over just visually. And then I sketch them in place. This is just rough, remember, so don't worry if your ears look a little funny at this point. Just make sure that they line up with each other. Hers are very symmetrical. You can draw a straight line across to be the bottom of the ears and the top of the ears. So just keep that in mind. Then another really great one to know is the bottom of the eyes. Ooh, look, they're perfectly straight. That's very unusual. So about a quarter of the way up above the 5 is going to be the bottom of her eyes. About here. Lightly sketch a sketch line. And then the center of the nose. E1/2. Just as precise can be. Right between the E and the F. That's the center of the face, and that's the center of her nose. You see what I mean about her having really regular features. Bottom of the nose. About a quarter of the way under the 6. About here. Top of the lip, right above the 7. Bottom of the lip, quarter of the way above the 8. Top of the lip. Bottom of the lip. Now, at this point, I should be able to see if the features are going to fit on the page with accuracy. And right now they do, which means that I have been using my graph well, and everything is looking about right. If you wind up doing this and you can even tell at this point that the nose is way too low or the eyes are way too high or something, go back and double check even before you draw the features. So always use your common sense as well as your eyes. Let them dictate to you as you use the graph as well. So about quarter under the 4. Okay. So then what you can do is you can use a different sort of measuring system to make the more intricate, smaller features of the inside of the face. So to know how far apart the eyes are, for instance, I'm going to use this piece of scratch paper, I'm going to mark down one eye length, outside to outside. You can see that the eyes are exactly an eye length apart, and that both of them, in this case, are the exact same length. Measuring down from the bottom of an eye, I come up with the center of the nostril. An eye length down from that point is nothing too definite, but an eye length down from the bottom of the nose is exactly the bottom of the mouth. And then it's usually about half an eye's length, a little bit more than half, from the bottom of the lips to the bottom of the chin. And I'm going to guess on the placement of my first eye. I think it's about that long. If it is, that would mean that this eye starts here and ends here. That this should be the center of the nostril, which it looks like it's going to be high at this point. And then this should be the bottom of the nose. So I'm going to have to use my common sense and my eyeballing ability to come up with a happy medium. That means my eyes might be a little bit short. So then I'm going to make the adjustment and do it again. But notice how easy it is to make a change in the eye length when it's just two lines versus an entire complicated shape. So let me do this one more time here. If this is my eye length, then this becomes the second eye. This is the end of the second eye. This then is the center of the nostril, looks a lot accurate. And this is the bottom of the mouth, and that looks more accurate as well. So then I can start to sketch my features inside these shapes, and it goes really quickly because I have so much help. I have my graph and I have my little piece of paper, so I know the features are all going to be the right place and about the right size. And see how quickly I can just start to sketch in the shapes. Really roughly at first though, because I'm still willing to make big changes if I need to. I might get everything sketched out and then I can see like, oh, this doesn't feel right, or it doesn't look right. That nose looks way too big, or whatever. I can make those changes very easily. For the ends of the features, keep in mind that the nostrils line up with the insides of the eyes, and that the corners of the mouth line up usually with the centers of the eyes. Her mouth is a little bit more small this way, so it's going to end up about right here. But then within those guidelines, boom, sketch, done, simple. And see, even before I have very much drawn at all, it's looking accurate. So I feel good about my graph, and I feel good about my sketch lines, which means I can erase the guidelines and push forward with greater realism in these features. So in this stage, I'm just going to clarify the lines. I'm going to add my eyelids. I'm going to put more detail into the irises. I'm going to put a little bit more detail into the eyebrows, place the pupils. Don't overdraw though. That's the tendency here. try to overdraw and then your face suddenly looks like a scary mask. Don't outline those lips. Just indicate them with very light sketch lines. Okay, so that's looking good. The next step here is going to be to lay down a first pass of tone. But before I do that, I'm going to just clean up my lips a little bit more. They're looking a little sketchy. And I'm going to let it rest. So I'm going to put it away, come back to it with fresh eyes, make any adjustments that I need to finalize my sketch. Then I'll come back and show you how to add the first pass of tone. Okay, this is as far as I need to push the under drawing before I add tone to the skin. And on this first pass, we're just adding a base tone. So don't consider this the shadows on the face, it's just the color of the skin. So the first thing that I like to do is to use a white piece of, these are the same things that I use for my paintings. They're just pieces of white watercolor paper, and then I put it up against the lightest portion of the skin so that I can get a sense of just how light a value the lightest tone needs to be. And that's what I'm going to start by putting down all over the face. So even these highlights are very, very crisp and white. That's where the light is striking, but the rest of this base tone is just a skosh darker than the white of the page. So I'm going to cover everything except these very bright whites of the eyes with a nice base skin tone first of all. So let me get a medium charcoal pencil here. I'm going to start up in the hair. I've got to make that decision if I want, I think I do. I'm going to tape off the borders just up here and down here so that when I take off my tape it's nice and crisp, because I really like that. And since on this drawing we don't need to put any tone in the background, unlike last week when we did, I'm not even going to cover the entire up or down side of it. I'm just going to protect the portion that is next to the tone. If that doesn't make sense, it will in a second. Right here is where I'm going to be putting down tone, and that's all I'm going to protect. And down here it's going to be right by the shoulders. Very, very good. Okay. So now I'm going to put my paper on the side. Good. I'm going to tilt that paper on the side and just start filling in the tone using little circle strokes, starting in the hair. I'm not going to make the hair as dark as it will be at the end, not even close, because I don't want too much smearing to go into the skin. And then very smooth, you can see how much lighter the skin tone is than the hair. And you can go all the way across like this. Just don't scribble. So you're trying to follow the contour of the head. It's not straight across, it's gently curved, just the way the forehead is. You see? It's going to be the biggest a most effective use of your time to start in the shadows, even though these aren't the shadows that you're putting down right now, but to start in the darkest part of the face and move over to the lighter part, just barely hitting those light areas. We're going to cover the entire face this way, in the ears, the mouth, the nose, all of the skin, just not the whites of the eyes. I need a little bit of a flatter edge on this pencil, so I'm going to use a sandpaper block. Just go back and forth a few times, and that'll flatten that out. That way I can cover more. That way I can cover more of the paper at once, and it'll make a smoother pass. Remember, it's easy to go darker, but it's not easy to lighten up your tone once you've put it down, especially not evenly. So you need to make sure that you're doing this nice and lightly. And on those bright highlight side of the face, I'm not even going to add any tone at all, because I always want it to be as white as the paper. I'm staying away from the edge of the face on both sides pretty much, because there's a nice reflected highlight on her face that's really effective. It really helps to round her face and make it look three-dimensional, so I don't want any tone there at all. But then on the neck, it goes really, really dark. For the base tone though, I'm just keeping it pretty much the same tone throughout. This is darker than this, but after I blend, you're going to see that a lot of these differences, they just get taken care of. Okay, chamois cloth time. This base tone, I always use a chamois cloth. I wrap it around my finger, a place where I'm going to get a nice tone distribution, so this isn't right on a big dark blob. And then I'm going to use circle strokes and blend all those strokes together so you can't see any pencil lines anymore. Do this to cover the entire face, and just avoid your highlights. It's blending together really nicely here, so you can see that all of that smudginess and the charcoal texture of the pencil is getting rubbed away. Now be careful, because you will also rub away your pencil lines, and that is to a certain extent just unavoidable. So after this stage is done, you're going to have to go back in and bring out some of those lines again. Just try not to make them disappear completely. And you can work all the way down to the tape. That worked great. So now I can go back in, and after blending, it's really important that you protect the paper against your hand smudging. So I'm going to put down a clean sheet of paper, and I'm just going to redraw some, not all, but some of those dark lines of the features so that I don't lose them. So I'm especially working in the mouth and the nose. Be really, really careful though. Don't overdraw your features or you're going to get that mask. So let me just take this off camera real quickly, redraw these lines, come back and I'll show you how to add the shadow shapes. Okay, we are clocking right along on this, so now we're going to add some shadow shapes. The first step is to look at the reference material and determine where those shapes are. So there's a really strong stripe here, but it's not just one stripe. You see how it goes up and into the eye, over here, into the forehead, avoids this highlight because that's the forward-most part of the head, so that's catching the light. But it connects over here, down a bit here, and into the side of the face, like one big piece. And then it gets really dark down here. We have a really prominent shadow. This entire portion is going to be darker, and then especially dark right under the chin, because the chin juts forward and casts a shadow on the neck. So because of this kind of unusual front lighting, we have pretty dramatic shadows. So it's really important to pay attention to exactly where they go, how dark they need to be, and how connected they are to the rest of the shadows that lie over the whole face. So what you're going to hear me say a lot is look for the shadow shapes and put them down as one big piece. And that's what I mean. So you're looking for not just this is a little bit darker over here and this is a little bit darker, I'll scrub in something here. Be precise. Look for the shapes. If you need to, you can squint at the reference material, and that will help those shapes to pop out. So once you've determined where they are, I like to tilt my board again, protect the drawing from your hand to keep down the smudging, and then I'm going to work from the top down, and this time I'm pressing just a little bit harder, taking my time and very smoothly adding these shapes of shadows. See how I go from a back and forth contour stroke to a round circle stroke that will blend the pencil lines into the rest of that shape. Goes over and down. Not too fast, not scribbly, taking our time. You don't ever want to bite lines into the paper, especially not at this stage, because that's going to be a line that you will not erase. So until you are absolutely sure that is exactly where you want your line to be, you don't want any lines biting into your tooth of your paper. And at this point, we're doing shading, so everything should be on the side of the pencil, no lines at all. Remember, there are no lines on the face. Sometimes it looks like there are lines. That's just the contours, the sharp contours of the features catching the light at different angles. It makes it look like there are lines, but there aren't really lines, because our faces aren't outlined onto the background. They exist as a three-dimensional object. Now see how carefully I'm going around the edge of the face where that bright shadow exists. I'm going to work inward like this and lightly put down this shadow shape that goes all the way across the cheek and down into the chin. And I'm doing it all in one big piece. Working this way too will help you to remember that the features don't stop. So it doesn't really make sense to work on them separately. Like now I'll work on this eye, now I'll work on this eye. Especially when you're doing the shadows, they fall over the whole face at the same time. And they interact with the different parts all together. So they do create larger pieces. That's what you need to look for. Get those shadows that are under the eyes. And that travel down the side of the nose. They're light in this case. They definitely need to be there so that you can see how the bridge of the nose is on a different plane than the cheeks. And at this point, after you're done, it's going to look really weird, like the person is wearing a weird shadow mask, and that is good. This is the only time that you do want the face to look like a mask. It's not because the outlines are so strong, it's because your shadow shapes interconnect. Corners of the lips, they have just a little bit at this point. I'll be working on them separately, but remember, these shadows fall over everything. I'm going to follow the same process to add this darker shadow on the neck, under the chin. Just keep it close. Be careful around the side of the chin here. So I'm not actually tilting the pencil onto the point, but I'm getting really close to doing it. Okay, so fantastic. Now to blend this much larger space, these shadows are still pretty big. So you can either use, boy, that's just clunking and clunking. There we go. You can either use a stomp or tortillon, number 5 or larger, or you can go back to your chamois cloth. The chamois cloth picks up a lot more tone though, so it's going to lighten things up a lot. You saw how much it lightened up in the first pass. So usually I don't even question, I go straight to the largest stomp that I have for the area, and I just start to add my blending pass and put it down in the same way. The problem is sometimes it's not as smooth as I want it to be. So let me see what I can do about that. Let me see how it looks with the chamois cloth. It smooths it more and it lightens it more, just like I expected. Which means that I might have to do this step twice. But no problem. Because another benefit of the chamois cloth is that it's actually quite a bit faster than the stomp or tortillon. It's just kind of a wider swath. So, especially in those larger areas, I can just sort of wipe the chamois and it smooths everything really nicely. And then I'm going to do the same thing again, but before I start adding more tone, I'm going to blow off any eraser crumbs, and then I'm going to flatten my kneaded eraser into a blade and pick out any of those sharp highlighted edges that I need to. So I'm looking around at the edge of the neck and the edge of the chin especially. Here at the side of the face. I just don't want to lose this edge of the face where I've got that great reflected light. It makes this such an effective portrait. So I'm going to pick out those areas. And then if I need to add some more shadows, which I do, I'm going to do that in the same process. And this time I'm going to lean to the even darker shadow shapes that I see. So I'm going to emphasize the areas where the shadows are the darkest. I'm going to put them in with the small circle strokes like this. And then I'm going to blend those areas, this time definitely using my large stomp. And I'm going to circle stroke to blend like this. I'm going to do that all over the hair. And then I'm going to come back to you and show you what it looks like. So this is how it starts to look after blending with the stomp. This is the original, and so you have a long way to go, but the portrait starts to get this really cool smoky quality, and you can't tell such hard lines in the shadow shapes. But after blending, you need to go back once again with your blade and pull out those sharp highlights. You really don't want to lose those, not in this portrait, because it's so powerful. And don't forget around the chin. Just keep doing it after every blending pass to keep those nice and light and clean, and then you won't wind up with any dirty smudges or any problems like that at the end. Okay, now we need to go and add some more tone, and now we are going to start using the point of the pencil, because we're going to draw out some of those darks in the features. I'm going to go ahead and start in the eye, filling in the pupil really carefully. You don't want to kill the light in the eye, so be very careful when you're working in the eye not to cover up everything. And not to go too dark. Even though this drawing makes it look like, or the reference material makes it look really, really black, I'm still going to add some variation in my tones in the iris. Some little spokes. And I do want to keep it really, really dark, because those eyes popping forth are so dramatic, and they really draw the great attention to the portrait. I mean, they're just vivid, so alive. So I want to keep that, but you know, it's tempting to go and do a lot of that work right now, but don't do it yet. This isn't eyelashes stage yet. While I'm on this side of the face though, I do want to add just a little bit more detail in these eyebrows. Now I'm right-handed, so even though you're supposed to go left to right, I tend to start on the right, you know, this side, and don't do that. Do what I say, not what I do, but it's not the end of the world. But you are going to run into more possibility of smudges if you're crossing over your work, so try to start on the left. Just do it automatically, naughty. love those curving, dramatic eyebrows too. Okay, so now I'm gonna cross over. And I like to start with the pupils as I add tone, just so I can be sure that the eyes are looking the same way. So your eyes, you should have about the same amount of whites around both eyes generally, especially if it's a face forward look like this, then you do. And if you do your eyes at the same time, it's just a little easier to keep the irises even sized and shaped. And you can see right away if you've gone too big or too small. Don't go too heavy-handed underneath the eyes either. The under eyelid is thinner than the upper eyelid, and the lashes are thinner there as well, so you're not going to see those really dark dramatic lines on the under eyelid. But you do want an indication of there being something there, so that it doesn't look like the eyes are just slits in the head. There's this whole system of the eyeball itself and these upper and lower eyelids that have some dimension to them. So there needs to be an inside line and an outside line for both lids. And then just some shading in the corners and some highlights in the corners so that it will look rounded and wet. So you need the surface to look like it's wet and that it's a sphere. Add those eyelash or the eyebrows. I like to give myself some lines for guidance of the inside and outside first, and then fill it in. And that way they don't get too thin, too thick, going the wrong direction. And just fill in with strokes of hair going the same way that the hair actually grows. So I'm doing this way, root to tip, not tip to root. We're going to add some additional tone in the ears. We're going to go around and we're just going to look and see where some more tone needs to go. Working down. And after this point, it's just going to be a back and forth. I'm going to add tone, I'm going to blend it with my stomp, I'm going to add additional tone, blend, add, pull out highlights as needed. Keep that sandpaper block nice and close so that you can continually give yourself the sharpest point on your charcoal pencil. Charcoal especially wears down fast. Then in the mouth here. Her mouth is just slightly open, the corners are dark, and don't over outline. Let the tone indicate where the upper boundaries of the lips are, but don't outline them like clown lips. Heavier line under here, just because it's casting a shadow and so it looks darker. And then some tone in the corners to make them look round and beautiful. Here's that slightly open mouth, and then very, very dark in between the lips so that they do look parted. going to go dark in the nostrils as well. And underneath here, it's very dark. So after that work is done, I'm going to use my tortillon again and just blend those lines out. And I'm not necessarily blending it so that it looks smeary, or even like it necessarily needs to blend in to all the other tone. There are some really distinct edges in this, but you don't want it to look like a line. So the function of the Stomper tortillon is to blend out one side of the line so that the features don't start looking too outlined. And then I can add tone in the darks with some circle strokes. And blend with circle strokes as well. And then especially in the nose where you have this really cool rounded plane meets rounded plane sort of shape going on, you want to pull out some highlights around the corners, on the tips of the nostrils especially, and sometimes there's a highlight on the bulb of the nose as well, because it's standing out, so you could expect that there'd probably be something. Just a slight tonal variation if nothing else. And then don't forget the same sort of work in the lips. I'm going to pull out some of those lines with the blade, and then I can re-emphasize them with my pencil, but by pulling it out at the lines when the tone is really light, I allow myself to get some more whites, because it's easier to pull out highlights from lighter tone than darker. See, then I can just go in and darken up some of these cracks with the pencil really carefully. And I don't even necessarily have to blend. I can if I need to, but I've already pulled out the detail with the kneaded eraser and it looks good, so that might be all I need to do. Let me move into the hair. I'm going to do some more work in the face, but I can do some of that off camera. It's very, very similar. Just quickly blot these eyes so that you can see. To blend, you don't necessarily need to do any wiping. When the area is small especially, you can just get away with filling in tone by bouncing up and down like this. Make sure that you blend the lids of the eyes before you add any lashes. Otherwise you're going to smear those lashes, cause yourself a lot of trouble. So don't do it. Now, in the hair, you can start, since the forehead is all blended, I'm going to add a few lines like this around the forehead, showing how the hair is pulling back. And then I'm going to have some very dark areas, and around the outside I'm going to let it be a little bit less distinct. So there's sort of this fuzzy texture here, and the line quality goes a little bit lighter. So there's some sort of flyaway hairs that stand off the main hairstyle, and then the core of it is dark like this, and I can darken it up using circle strokes. Just don't darken up everything to the same extent. See how this is sort of modeled? That's what you want. It will look like hair is standing up and the light can show through it a bit, not just a solid mass. So I'm going to do this sort of work. I'm going to do it off camera to save some film time. This is exactly what I'm going to do, and just fill in. And then I'm not going to blend this because the texture that I see after just putting down the charcoal looks pretty good. And I want the texture of the hair to be different from the texture of the skin tone, so that it will look like, you know, two different textures, like it really is. So don't over smooth your hair. and don't undersmooth your skin. Let those be different. I'm going to do, though, similar work down here. I have to take my time and outline first and then fill in with very small little circle strokes like this, making it really, really dark. And then I'm going to blend this because it is not hair, it's skin. So to keep this texture distinct from what's going on up here, I'm going to be bearing down with the tip of the charcoal pencil, not using it on the side like I am up here. And then afterwards, I'm going to blend with the circle strokes with my stomp. So let me add some more of these tones and we'll come back and we'll add the details like the eyelashes, more cracks in the lips if we need to, things like that. Okay, I have some of those darker shadows in place and they're not all completely smooth. So down here, I need to do some more work doing that sort of thing. Just using my stomp and going over those tones. But see how those lines are staying nice and crisp. That's just what I want. So then I'm just going to carefully smooth with the stomp. Smooth with the circle strokes like this until all of that flesh tone is done. And having the tape here is really great because I can just go right over. You can see here, got a little bit out of line. So what I'll need to do in that area is just clean it up. All right, but now let's move into some of these details so that you can see how I would do that sort of step. I'm going to change to a pencil that has a different kind of tip. So this is always going to be a more square, blocky tip because it's one of those Chinese peel and sketch pencils. And I like, or at least they're like a Chinese marker, and I don't know if they're Chinese or not. Anyway, I like to use a couple of different kinds, and for my details I use these regular pencil form of the charcoal pencils. So to add some eyelashes now, I'm going to start at the base and then just pull up one quick stroke for each eyelash. And just don't overdo it. It's really, really easy to get your eyelashes too hairy and too overwhelming, just putting in too many of them, because they're fun and easy to do and they make a striking difference right away. But don't fall into the temptation and do too many. When you're putting in the details in your drawings and your paintings alike, always err on the side of less. Put in less than you think you might need, because the eye will fill in more details for you. So all you really have to do is put in an indication and the eye will bump up the level of realism one level, which is why it's so effective to have a really loose style, you know, with just a few details in the foreground, and then it's surprising how many details the eye will really just put in for you. Like think of an impressionistic painting, for instance. There's no question what you're looking at from a distance or even close up a lot of times, because the Impressionists were so good at just creating an impression, a glimpse of what they were seeing, and then leaving it to the viewer to fill in the rest of those details. And it's really striking how the realism can just glow, especially from a distance. They were so good with colors. Anyway, the same principle applies in all forms of art. So don't get your drawings and paintings too bogged down in the details, because it will start to look overworked, and then you'll actually lose a level of realism. I'll see the difference between these two eyes. And then I'm also going to bump up the darks because it's just so strikingly dark on the reference material, and I want to keep that in my drawing. So I'm going to strengthen the outline around the iris and in the upper lid here. I'm going to even strengthen some of the outline in the corner of the eye and in the upper eyelid. So all you need to do in this last level, this last stage of the drawing, is to go in big with those details and try to put them in strongly with one sure stroke. And now you can see the difference between this eye and this eye. This one is a lot closer to what I see in the reference material. It almost makes it look a little bit bigger too. Which is another reason why it's good to have those graphs when you're doing the layout stages, because when you just have the bare contours of the shapes of the features, after you start adding tone, they can often look very different sized than they did in the original layout. I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that in the nose as well. Just going to go in strong in the under nose here and in the nostril and under the nostril. Really bump up those contrasts, just like I see in the reference. You can see the difference on this side versus that side, even with those few strokes done. Same thing in the lips. I'm going to go in darker in the corners of the mouth and in between these parted lips. I'm going to strengthen that a little bit more. And just some really intense darks will push those features back and strengthen the realism. I'm going to soften and blend the lips with my stomp. You have to do more blending in the lips oftentimes and in the nose because these features are generally more soft and the lines aren't as distinct. So whenever you put down some details in those two features, you're probably going to need to soften it and blend it. So I'm going to finish doing that work. Shouldn't take very long at all. Just going to add those additional darks to the features. And I'm going to blend, and I'm going to blend these darks. And then this drawing is almost done. See how I hold the stomp on the side here? So I'm still working it with the point, but I'm not using an overhand point hold. I want to get more side. I want to use a side of it that will give me a little bit better control in blending. So this way I get a lot of pressure on the point, but I'm also using a lot of the side. So it's really great for blending small details. And I want to keep them dark, but I also need to blend out the edges. So another key in this stage is just to keep your pencil tip nice and sharp. And then of course, always, always, always pay attention to your reference material so that you're not darkening up the wrong areas or strengthening the wrong lines. So let me take about 20 minutes off camera and do the rest of this work, tightening up the details. I'll come back to you one last time and we'll take that tape off. Okie dokie, I've added some more details in the eyes and the other features. So here's our original, and here's the finished drawing. It's pretty good, yeah. Looking from back to forth, the nose might be a little bit low on the drawing, and the lips could be a little bit more full. So, you know, there's usually things that you can change. There's usually things that you can fuss around with. So at the end of the day, you really need to focus on, is it a good piece of art, and does it do its job? If this were a commissioned portrait, you know, I might need to start over making that nose a little bit higher. It's not a commissioned portrait. It's just a drawing to be a good tutorial to show you the process of how to draw a face. And so to that extent, I think that it does do the job. You can see what a huge difference it makes once you add those additional shadows around the eyes and the darks in the eyes themselves, how that really does make it pop the same way that it does on the reference material. And you know, you can go back and you can add some more darks to the ears and do some more work, but always keep in mind those two key pieces of advice I have. Number one, don't overdo it in the details. And number two, as you push forward in the drawing, continually stop, step back, and let your eyes rest so that you can come back to it with fresh eyes, and that will really help your mistakes to pop out at you. If you keep doing that as the drawing develops, then you're not going to wind up with something that's really, really finished like this, and then have a big jarring mistake, like, oh, her eyes are way too high, or they're way too small, or whatever it could be. Anything can go wrong. But if you take your time and you work it up all together and continually give your eyes a chance to break, come back to it, looking at it with fresh eyes, then you're going to catch those mistakes. At least you're more likely to catch those mistakes while you still have a chance to make some adjustments. So, if I'm picking at it, I like to pick at my stuff. I have a bad tendency to do that, because it's just, there's always a few more things you can add, and I know that you can just work and work and work on a drawing or a painting. But let's take the tape off so that you can see how it would look with that clean white border. In this case, it's probably not going to make that big a difference because most of the background is already white. But it's always fun to do. And it does just always make the artwork pop a little bit more. Yeah, there, pop. So, here you can see that clean top and bottom edge. And you can imagine how it would look with a nice neutral frame, making the features pop a little bit more and the highlights come out a little bit more. So that's where I'm going to leave this month's drawing tutorial. I hope that you've learned some things that you can take away into your own studio. This is a fantastic portrait for you to download and try your hand at home, because the features are nice, easy to see, regular, very, very good for using the measuring systems, both the outside graph and the internal eye length measuring system that I like to employ. So I do urge you to try this one at home. Do it multiple times if you want to. You're going to find that some things are better and some things get a little bit easier every time you do it. And those lessons are things you can take with you, not only into this portrait, but into everything that you do, drawing and painting, as you develop as an artist. So thank you so much for watching, and best of luck to you.